Dealers, need more used cars fast? With Kelley Blue Book Instant Cash Offer, you can connect directly with local sellers to win more inventory, improve look to book, and lower cost to market. That's the instant advantage. Request a demo today at b2b.kbb.com/ICO.
Hey, this is Daily Drive executive producer Jake Neer in Detroit. Thanks for joining me for this bonus episode of the show. On Tuesday, we brought you part of Automotive News Congress Conversations live stream this week on the state of auto trade and USMCA, a panel discussion led by our own Hannah Lutz and Automotive News Canada's Greg Layson, with industry experts Colin Shaw of MEMA Original Equipment Suppliers, Linda Hassenfratz of Linamar, and David Gans of the Baker Institute. We had more from that conversation than we could fit into Tuesday's show, and it's worth hearing. The panel gets into some of the more pointed questions from the audience. For example, whether the Gordie Howe Bridge is being used as a negotiating chip in USMCA talks, how a renegotiated deal would address Chinese parts flowing into North American supply chains, and where automotive tariffs might realistically land if zero tariff trade doesn't survive the renegotiation. Here's that conversation.
We have a question from the audience, and I'm going to direct this one to Greg because I know he's been doing a lot of reporting on this. Is the opening of the Gordie Howe Bridge part of the USMCA negotiations?
It is not officially part of the negotiations, but as I told some folks last week, Donald Trump and his administration leaves no stone unturned. They are masters at turning anything into a bargaining chip. And that's what they've done in this case, is they have looked at that and said, well, if you don't agree to our terms in USMCA, then I'm not going to grant permission to open that bridge. And so it applies pressure at the negotiating table for Canada and the United States. It's not officially part of USMCA. Could it be? I mean, maybe they could somehow write that in there. I don't know. I'm not that much of an expert, but what I can tell you right now is no, it is not part of USMCA, but is being played as a pawn or a chess piece in the negotiating game. And as I said in my piece, Mayor Drew Dilkins in Windsor said that bridge could open tomorrow if they wanted, but they're waiting on Donald Trump and officials at the federal level to approve it.
Colin, can you talk more about, the importance of that bridge? Have you heard from members, what if they are, it doesn't exist yet, so they can't be relying on it, but what difference it will make to their the transportation of their parts?
Yeah, it helps. We haven't got a ton of blowback on it, honestly, from our members. It helps free things up, helps things move a little more seamlessly, gives a little more competition to freight rates, especially in a market where freight rates, they're under attack from diesel prices, drivers, and rising insurance costs. So any help that we can get on the freight side is really helpful. And I think the bridge helps do that here in this area. So the sooner it can be open, the better. But I'll be honest, we haven't heard a ton of blowback from our members about the bridge.
Another audience question. What policy measures within or alongside the USMCA could address concerns about the growing use of Chinese parts in U.S. supply chains while maintaining trade efficiency and product quality? How would a new version of the USMCA speak to that, the Chinese parts?
There's a few silent partners to USMCA, China being one of them. And they're absolutely, whether it's China or other non-market economies, I do expect some degree of restriction on non-market economies to make things more fair and competitive. And I think that's what it's all about. It's about creating a level playing field here in North America to make sure that we're all operating under the same investment principles, fair labor practices, those kind of things. And that's, if we can all meet that, then I don't think any supplier would hesitate to compete from North America with anybody else abroad. But we have to make sure that those rules are fair that we're operating in North America.
I think, obviously, one of the objectives of the Trump administration is to reduce the importation into Mexico or Canada or anywhere else of parts from outside the U.S. I'm not sure that anyone cares about Vietnam at the moment, which is the other non-market economy. Certainly, China is the focus, but it's worth keeping in mind that GM, for example, it imports very substantial quantities of vehicles and parts from South Korea, their factories there. And so I think if you reduce the non-North American content to 82% or whatever number from increase it to 75, from 82 to 75, you will probably encourage some manufacturers to make more of their components in North America and less in China. How big an impact that will be obviously depends on a lot of things like labor costs in the U.S. and Canada, among others, and also the extent to which potential investors are willing to rely on the stability of the new rules.
Dealers, need more used cars fast? You're not alone. And waiting for inventory to show up isn't much of a strategy. That's where Kelley Blue Book Instant Cash Offer comes in. Backed by Kelley Blue Book's 100 years of trusted valuation expertise, Instant Cash Offer connects you directly with local sellers so you can win more inventory right when you need it. And because the experience is transparent and consistent from the first click, it helps build trust early, before a customer ever walks through your doors. That trust matters. It sets expectations up front, reducing friction in the appraisal process. What that means for your team is more control over how inventory comes onto your lot and more time focused on selling cars, not chasing them. It's a smarter way to source inventory in today's competitive market, and that's the instant advantage. If you're ready to connect with local sellers, win more inventory opportunities, and lower cost to market with an approach dealers rely on, check out Kelley Blue Book Instant Cash Offer. Request a demo today at b2b.kbb.com/ICO.
Electric pickups were supposed to be a breakout segment, but so far, the results have been underwhelming. So who actually wants an electric truck?
Pickup buyers are typically not going to be the type of people that are excited about electric vehicles.
On this week's episode of the Automotive News Shift podcast, we hear from EV and charging analyst Lauren McDonald of Chargenomics. He breaks down why big electric pickups have struggled, why things might be different for a smaller, more efficient electric truck, and why high gas prices could boost hybrids more than full EVs in the near term. I'm Molly Boygon. Join me on Shift, available this Sunday wherever you get your podcasts.
David, I want to ask you this question. A lot of people almost are resigned to the fact that there are going to be some sort of automotive tariffs in the next USMCA, or maybe auto's not included and it's a separate side deal on automotive. In fact, Ontario's trade representative in Washington, Dave Patterson, who used to work for General Motors Canada, has said we're going to have to live with the fact that there's going to be tariffs on auto. Where do you see those tariffs landing if that's the case? Is this equal to the tariffs that we see the United States apply to the EU and Japan? Is it less than that? Is there a number that's been bandied around that, it's 10% or it's going to be 8% or 12%? Where do you see tariff, parity, if you will?
I think there's several possibilities. Obviously, the EU and Japan and Korea have a 15% tariff, which, depending on such other things like the lower price steel and aluminum, may be very competitive. The flat rate for Canada, Mexico is 25%, but you get a credit. So if it's a 50% U.S. content, then the effective rate is 12%. I will be surprised if the rates come below 10%, but it's entirely possible. I haven't seen any indication from the U.S. government or reports from the U.S. government that suggests what the numbers will be. I'm not at all sure that a 10% or what kind of a tariff has to be put together to equal the 12.5% effective tariff in this situation. On the other hand, if you don't meet the rules of origin, and I don't know what the numbers are, 10, 12% to 15% in the past, you're paying a 25% tariff, which obviously means it's going to be cheaper to produce those vehicles somewhere else, outside the United States. So I assume USTR is looking very carefully at these numbers. Hopefully the Mexican government has been thinking about them as well. But I would be surprised if it goes to zero again for the vehicles that meet the new rules of origin.
I'd just like to make a quick comment on that I think David's probably right. It doesn't go to zero. But let's envision a scenario where it's somewhere between 0 and 10%, maybe between 5 and 10%. Personally, I think that in Canada, we can close that gap in terms of competitiveness with the U.S. plants. You know, number one, the dollar is going to be on our side in that calculation. And number two, the Canadian automotive plants are incredibly productive. In fact, General Motors Oshawa is their most productive plant in the world. GM's most productive plant in the world. So, I mean, when you combine a little bit of a weaker dollar and, you know, incredibly high levels of productivity and efficiency in the Canadian automotive plants, like we can close a gap of 5% or even 10%, in my opinion, that the cost to build that vehicle in Canada versus the cost to build it in the U.S. would not be dissimilar.
So given that, and given that we've heard people within the industry and our own trade representatives say tariffs are probably here to stay on some level, then is this renegotiation, while we've focused on Canada for the last, 15 months, is it really about Mexico then, Colin or David? Is that really the issue that Donald Trump has, and Canada has been sort of the play to shift focus and make changes in Mexico?
Well, I think obviously a lot of this is speculation. But if you look at Canada and Mexico at one level, Canada and the U.S. on one level, labor costs are relatively similar.
Right.
In Mexico, they're about 5-1 or 6-1. So Mexico has a huge labor cost advantage, which probably won't go away, particularly if you get to a 5% or a 10% tariff. How it will balance is hard to say. The Honda and Toyota and the big three have huge investments and very productive operations in Canada. So I don't see most of them abandoning that, although we've seen Stellantis do some of that in the last year or so. So I don't think it's necessarily a disaster for the Canadian industry. I think the lower the tariff, whether it's 5% or 10%, or again below 12.5%, the better off Canadian producers are.
I think also, on paper, Mexico may have more exports and imports to the United States of auto parts. But if you start looking to the future of what we need to do in this region, especially if we're going to be asked to decouple from non-market economies, we absolutely need Canada from a raw material standpoint, critical minerals, things like that. Steel and aluminum, huge part of Canadian market. There's tooling capacity in Canada, which we desperately need if we're going to tool and make things in North America. So if you start extrapolating into the future, all three become equally important because of the needs that we have. If we're going to build more manufacturing in North America, we all have to rely on each other. No one market becomes more dominant or more important than another. So I caution that, okay, on paper, it may look like Mexico is a larger trading partner in automotive, but extrapolating into the future means that everybody has a part to play, and an extremely important part to play as we start producing higher levels of technology here in the region.
That was more from this week's Automotive News Congress Conversations panel on USMCA and the state of auto trade. You can find the full conversation on our LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube pages, and you can find the full 3-week series of stories on trade in North America at autonews.com. Thanks for listening to this bonus episode of the show, and make sure you come back on Monday for a brand new full episode of Daily Drive.